Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Cloud Enabling Your Legacy Fax Environment. I am very pleased to have all of you join us today, and we have got a great panel of speakers and a really information-packed session for you today. Joining us today from Etherfax, we have Paul Benko, CEO, and Ryan Collins, Director of Support and Technical Operations. And Paul and Ryan are going to take us through an in-depth look at Etherfax from both the standpoint of enabling your existing fax server as well as enabling your cloud enabling your fax integrations. And then I'm very pleased to be joined by Ken Anaya, account manager at Instant Infosystems. And Ken brings decades of experience working with Fortune 1000 companies and helping them really streamline their document delivery operations, understanding their business challenges, and finding the right solutions for those organizations. And we're really lucky to have Ken with us today. He's going to take us through several specific examples of how IIS and Etherfax together have solved some pretty significant challenges for our customers. But before we get going, I want to take just a few minutes to do a little bit of housekeeping. On your screen, you should see the GoToWebinar control panel, and that is where you are free to ask your questions at any time during the presentation. If we're able to address those questions along the way, we certainly will do that. Otherwise, we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And please note, if we don't have enough time to get to all of the questions, we will definitely be reaching out to all of you individually to make sure that you do get the information that you need. So real quick, wanted to go over today's agenda. We're going to start by talking about cloud enabling your legacy fax server. Why would you want to do this? What are the benefits of cloud enabling your fax server? And what are the options available to you? And then we'll talk about, beyond just cloud enabling your fax server, critical to every organization are their fax integrations, and how can we streamline those and really improve the functionality of those integrations. And we've got several case studies lined up to show you how organizations have done just that. And then we're going to get a sneak peek from Paul Benko, what's next for Etherfax, a forward look at what's coming from this technology leader. And then at the very end, we will wrap up with Q&A for as much time as we have. So really quick, before I hand it over, I wanted to talk just a minute about the relationship between Etherfax and IIS. As you can see here, Mark Malone, he is a leading industry analyst in the fax technology space, and he's had some very complimentary things to say about these two organizations, specifically around Etherfax's technology leadership and IIS's expertise and ability to meet the changing needs of its customers. But really, what does that mean to you? Well, what that means is that both of our companies bring an extensive depth of knowledge and expertise in fax solutions and technologies. But most importantly, when you choose a cloud solution from Etherfax and Instant Infosystems, you benefit from leading-edge technology, world-class end-to-end technical support, and the flexibility to implement a cloud solution that will meet your needs today and well into the future. So without any further delay, I am very happy to turn the presentation over to my friend and colleague, Paul Benko. Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Ken. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Paul, are you with us?
I am. Are you there? Hello, Julie. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Paul. I think you can go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. It says I'm not on mute. Thank you, Julie, very much. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time. I know some of it is early morning for you yet, and it's afternoon for others. So once again, thank you. As Julie mentioned, we're going to be talking about several things today, several case studies, and what's in the future of fax, if you will. So a little bit about Etherfax. We were founded in 2009. We have offices in New Jersey and Denver. The company was founded by telephony industry veterans. We've been in this vertical for, a combined experience of over 60, 70 plus years. We were the first true infrastructure as a service provider using modern day computing technology. We process over 70 million pages a month in fax alone, and that's growing at an unprecedented rate. We do have worldwide points of presence for fax origination and termination. We're in about 51 different countries. All of our integrations are non-intrusive, either both on the application side or to existing fax products. For compliance, we utilize Equinix IBX data centers to ensure high availability, fault tolerant, and as I mentioned, compliance. The technology that you're going to be looking at today, and including the future technology, is all under the EtherFax patents. And we are the only fax service out there today to offer end-to-end encryption. And we're going to go a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. So what is EtherFax? We are a fax board in the cloud. We basically eliminate expensive fax boards, SR-140, XCAPI, telephone circuits, your telephone carrier. There's no long distance charges. There's no time on the wire. You're only charged for successful page deliveries. So it's never a moving target or a variable cost. Your entire telephony infrastructure and all the headaches and expense associated with it is reduced to nothing more than, hey, if you could hit Google, you can utilize EtherFax. So why cloud enable your environment? You're taking the complexity out, you're simplifying the infrastructure, you're single sourcing your telco, and you're enabling technology that one throat to choke. Very minimal CapEx. You're automatically gaining high availability and disaster recovery. I mean, EtherFax leverages about 12 different carriers. You have centralized management. There's just a lower total cost of ownership no matter how you look at it and do the math. It's much more secure than what you're doing today. It's increased transmission success. I mean, especially for those of you who have migrated to fax over IP technology, you're seeing your success rates drop, and you're getting a never busy inbound option, which is a great feature in itself. So some of the key considerations, when choosing a cloud provider or really any fax telephony infrastructure at that point. For those of you who have to adhere to security and compliance, EtherFax is PCI Level 1 certified. We are currently going through a Scope 3.2 certification. We expect to be fully compliant before the year's end. The type of encryption that's used, if you're using traditional T38, you are sending faxes out over an unencrypted medium. The location of data centers, are they strategically placed? Are they in a natural disaster zone or a non-natural disaster zone? There's long-term contracts that are involved, usability and visibility, what are the SLAs and uptimes, and is the company transparent to this? And innovation and future-proofing your investment. I like to always say that EtherFax is much more than dial tone, where every other service out there is using 100-plus-year-old technology. At the end of the day, you have two modems hissing at each other, taking a beautiful rich text document, downgrading it to 200 by 200 DPI, and hopefully getting that document across. So know your options, and I know we have several WriteFax users on the line and utilizing WriteFax Connect and what have you. Realize that EtherFax was built from the ground up. I mean, and these are just some of the differences within the EtherFax and WriteFax Connect product. We've heard plenty of stories as there's no visibility into the fax, long-term contracts, constantly being down. As you can see here, that's just not the case with EtherFax. Plus, we take security to a whole new level. We utilize a multi-layer level encryption, military-grade encryption, CIDR restriction rules, and all of our North American data centers are PCI Level 1 certified. I believe the OpenText only has one, which is actually right down the road from us in Tinton Falls, New Jersey. So why EtherFax? We eliminate the need for all the expensive fax hardware and telecom equipment. There's competitive per-page fax cost. There's no long-term contracts. We can scale from 500 to tens of millions of pages per month. We have 95% of North America covered for number portability, disaster recovery, and fault tolerance. It's built in. We don't charge you anything extra for it. Secure connections using multi-layer government-grade encryption. It's all there. We have proactive heartbeat alert notifications. We probe your server. If your server's down and we lose connectivity to it, not just your server, but your application, we're going to go ahead and be proactive and send you a notification around that. And if you'd like, we'll queue up your inbound faxes until your application or fax server makes a connection back to EtherFax. There's zero interoperability required. We don't require QoS. You don't have to worry about what switch you're running, what fiber, Cat5, what firewall you have. There's none of that. If you have access to the internet, you're good to go. And as I mentioned before, we are PCI Level 1 certified, and we also have HIPAA certification, or what I'd like to say is a third-party HIPAA audit. Both of these were done by TrustWave. Just to give you a little idea of the EtherFax architecture, everybody's, I would assume, is pretty familiar. I mean, you have a fax server, you either have a fax board or you're using SR140 or some type of fax over IP stack. We replaced the fax telephony or the enabling technology at that point, and you get all the features and functionality that you would get as if you had a local fax board or local telephony with the added security and the never busy inbound. We also provide a really nice customer portal where customers can kind of go in, see their metrics, any trends, see their secure exchange network transactions. We'll go over that more in depth in the presentation. But you have complete visibility into your fax transactions from across all types of products, regardless from an API perspective or a fax server perspective. And there's some features that you could assign in here as well. So let's talk about compliance and security real quick. I mentioned that we are PCI Level 1 certified. We do have SSAE or SOC Type 2 certification. We have a third-party HIPAA certification. EtherFax will sign a BAA if needed. We are highly secure internet transport, defense in depth, military-grade encryption, and we also have the ability to implement CIDR restriction rules if you feel that your organization needs that, or in terms of locking it down more. We are a transient system, so content is destroyed as delivered using FIPS 140-2 deletion methods. So your content only lives within EtherFax for the life of the transmission. After that, it's done and it's destroyed. Why is EtherFax so successful and has become the de facto standard? We know we have a lot of WriteFax users on the line with us today, but as you can see, EtherFax is the de facto standard transport for a number of different fax server products out there. And I'm going to let Ken Anaya jump in here, and he can kind of talk about the different solutions that they've implemented.
Yeah, Paul, thank you. We see with a lot of enterprises, it's not necessarily that a single fax server addresses all their needs, and either through acquisition or different business needs or business units, they have multiple solutions out there. So often it's very common that a single organization may have WriteFax and BizCom in their environment addressing very unique needs. So with that, I'd like to share some of the case studies that we have with our customers. We're very fortunate to have a large customer base. We are honored to be that partner of choice with our customers to really figure out what the best solution is for them to meet their business needs, not only their technical needs. So let's go into the case study one that we talked about, or actually, Paul, I think we talked about when we, driving these fax integrations. Let's address first these are really important to the business. You know, fax is a technology that is still relevant only because it's really important to the business. Whether you're sending a purchase order, you're sending healthcare-related documentation, or you're sending something via the fax line, there's a good reason why that technology still exists in your organization today. And we know that's important for not only the business, it's the lowest common denominator when it comes to sending information, but it's got to be something that's really important to you to continue to send that in that format, that fax format. So let me go ahead and now go into that case study.
Yeah, just before, Ken, we go into that, I just wanted to let our customers know that Instant Info is a premier partner with EtherFax, and as Julie mentioned, Ken has been helping customers for decades, for over 20 years. So, you know, with that being said, he's going to share some examples of how Ken and IIS has helped streamline these types of fax integrations.
Thanks, Paul. So here's our first case study that we want to share with the group. It's a health plan, and they had some challenges. They had an existing WriteFax server on premise. They were sending faxes that were approvals and denials of coverage to physician offices. So the challenge they were having was they really weren't getting great data back from the fax server on the success or failure of a fax in really a timely manner. At times, their faxes took a long time to queue because there were other competing business units and other competing applications that were also hitting the same server. And it was very difficult to prioritize their faxes over somebody else's. And that became a big problem. The other challenge is, you know, the information they were getting back from the board driver, it was being dumbed down. And our application customers are really intelligent, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that they have the detailed, specific reasons for success or failure so that they can then pass that information into their application and make another decision based on that. And I think that's one of the challenges they had when they were trying to write to their existing WriteFax server. So the solution that we were able to offer to them with the EtherFax API was that direct secure connection into EtherFax. We enabled the Never Busy service for them, and that was an option they opted in on, so that if a customer faxed one of their numbers that was hosted by EtherFax, they actually were always going to accept that call. And that's something that a customer would elect to have on or off. That increased value to their customer base. That ensured that their communications weren't, you know, going to give busy signals back to their customers. That was really important to their physicians that were faxing to them. We also have the ability with the EtherFax service to increase their channels dynamically. So we know that business is cyclical. No matter what industry you're in, what vertical, there are times of the year you may be faxing more than you had the prior month. The great news about the EtherFax service is that we can dynamically increase those channels as your business requires to really meet your business needs. And that's our goal, is to be your business partner and provide a solution that makes sense for your business all the time, not just half the year. The other value I think they got from the EtherFax integration was the ability to receive the detailed board error rates. Now, this will be the equivalent of writing to that Brooktrout or Dialogic driver and getting board-level error rates for why a fax has failed. And here's an example why that might be important, is that if it's a failure because it's a human answer, that's different than a failure because it's a bad phone line. The human answer process and the human answer error, we can have the customer push that back into their workflow, into their application, so that the business can actually immediately address that as a bad fax number and validate that fax number. So the next time they send a fax to that number, which is likely in the same day, they're going to have corrected that action. If it's a bad phone line, that's a ticket for the help desk. And that's something that they would then open a ticket with Instant Info Systems, so we can then interpret and understand why that line failed, and hopefully troubleshoot and redirect that line down a different call path. The last thing that I think this customer really valued was the ability to add their custom tracking IDs to the fax transaction. So by the time the fax got queued up and it was an authorization or a denial, and it went to the fax service, it already had a unique identifier from the application, which is very common to track and audit transactions. their concern with the other solution they tried was that they didn't have the ability to insert that notification into the application. So with EtherFax, they're actually able to use, I think it's our notes field, and add that unique identifier. So when they submit the fax and do the get fax status command, they're actually now getting their own identifier back so they can insert that into the record. I think those are really valuable things to this organization, and these are actually very specific requests from the business, and we love working with the business to probably solve their requirements, along with, of course, the IT team. Paul, I think you have some examples of the details of this code to go over, too.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Ken. So, and the field that Ken was referring to was the tag field, but we do have a notes field as well. So with that being said, I just put up a couple of code examples here for our developers on the line here. EtherFax was written, it's using modern web methods and languages and standards, if you will. I mean, here you see two different formats of a JSON query and an XML query. But when you write to the application or you write to the API, your initial query kind of just gives you your information. Do you have inactive call rejection? That's what Ken was talking about before, whereas if we lose status or lose a heartbeat to your application, we can go ahead and busy out those numbers, and that might be for compliance reasons. So these are all the programmable features that you get, and this is what an account status query returns. Very important here, if you take a look at the accepted formats, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because I'm going to go over that a little bit more in the presentation here. But we actually have some code here of a post or a submitting of a fax. So there's a couple of things right here, right? You submitted the fax. We immediately return a unique job ID, which is a 25, 35 character digit here, or a GUID in here, and then there's some fax results and what have you. So you can query based on this job ID. As Ken had mentioned, there's a tag status here. What's interesting is we actually support long gets, we support TCP push notifications. So as you're submitting fax jobs, you could also be querying for inbound fax jobs as well. And I think I actually have that here. So this is our fax status. So this is as the fax is either in transmission or complete. So we did a query on the job ID, we got a pages delivered, here's the connect time, this was the connect speed, this was the remote ID, and this was the tag that was submitted, and there's your completed on date. We've had a lot of compliments on our API. We certainly like to use the KISS method. Keep it simple, keep it plain, you have a document, get out and go. There's not much more needed here. So these are just some of the examples that are available, or snippets, if you will, that are available within our API. I'm going to hand it back over to Ken, and he's going to go into a different case study here, or another case study.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So with this case study, this was an auction house, and they're in a situation where they had to send transactional information or confirmations of purchases that were made by a customer at the end of the day to memorialize a transaction, a purchase they had made through one of their auction sites. Here is the challenge that they were facing, and they've done something that many of our customers have gone through, where they had the old fax server on, they had a fax card and a T1, and they went to do the transition to upgrade the fax server, and they realized that their phone carrier no longer provides those traditional PRI or T1 lines. They were forced to use a SIP line. So they figured SIP was what the telco was recommending, and they went ahead and did the upgrade. They have an SBC in-house, and we virtualized WriteFax and connected to that SIP connection. But the challenge that they were finding is that their error rates with the SIP carrier were doubled and tripled from what their existing PRI was doing. And the challenge is SIP is great. We love SIP, and SIP is a great product for voice. I'm sure every organization has some form of SIP for voice. But when it comes to fax, SIP is really a very challenging technology to work with. Now, we do have customers that work with SIP, but they have large teams of voice engineers that have really had the initiative to really monitor and set up SIP so that it's perfect for their environment. And as you know, probably, SIP changes. So one day it may be great. Other days you might have to do some adjustments on your customer equipment in order to ensure that SIP connections working perfectly. So again, the challenge was they moved to SIP, they increased their error rates after they just upgraded their environment. There is, again, no intelligence on why faxes failed. They may have sent a fax to the same number 3 different times a day, and it may be successful the 3rd time, and the first 2 were failed. No rhyme or reason, and really because of that, it's how SIP is designed. It may take a different call path on the backbone to get to the destination based on time of day or network saturation. So that's really up to the SIP carriers to decide, and our customers found that they really had no control over that. So they were kind of helpless when it came to the SIP integration. Their customer service team was fielding calls saying, "Where's my fax?" So instead of focusing on driving their business and moving their transactions forward to close business, they're fielding calls on "Where's my fax?" which really had stressed out the CSR team, as well as they had a number of tickets on the help desk. The bad fax numbers, for example, when they had a bad fax number in their database, there was no clear way to communicate that back to the customer service team so they can correct that action as well. So they had some similar challenges as the last example, but they were unique in that they tried that SIP conversion and they were definitely having some challenges. So how we helped them out is, we were able to integrate directly into their application, and this is something that happened within hours. Their developer worked with Ryan, who's on this call, who's very, very knowledgeable about the API, and we're really here to help you guys succeed when it comes to developing those integrations. And within hours, he had it up and running and connected directly from their application directly into the Etherfax API. The fax failure details, similar to the last example, because we're giving that detailed information, that specific error code of why it failed, they're able to separate the technical issues from the bad phone numbers. They also leverage the enhanced reporting from the Fax Customer Portal. So we're not only giving great metadata back from Etherfax into the application, but we know the customer service reps aren't necessarily going to look at that history. So we gave them access to the portal so their managers at the customer service team can run a report at any time they want and look at their failures and do some investigation on their side to see why a fax failed. We were able to increase their success rates from 83% with that SIP connection up to 98%. And lastly, eliminating that SIP line, the equipment, the fax server, that provided an overall better experience for this customer because they really wanted to stay in the business that they know and not in the fax business. So this is a great example of how they eliminated their fax server, then they tried SIP, and Etherfax has provided a lot of great benefits to them.
Excellent, Ken. Yeah, so as Ken had mentioned, they weren't giving back correct status codes or error codes, within the application. So I just took a quick snippet here out of our API, and these are just some of the error codes that are returned within the application. I could tell you that the Brook Trout or Dialogic error codes, there's about 400 of them. We actually kept it, we trimmed it a lot to make it easier for the developer and our engineers to troubleshoot fax transactions. And you'll see some things on here that are not fax oriented, like maybe like an unauthorized or a file not found. And I'm going to go over that a little bit later in our presentation of what else really Etherfax or this massive network could be used for. Ken also mentioned that we gave them some really nice reporting. So just taking some snapshots over here out of the customer portal, you can see here that this is the inbound transaction history. Users have access to this. This is all secured by two-form factor authentication as required by PCI. So this is giving you some inbound fax transaction histories. These are giving you some outbound fax transaction histories. So you can go in and query all of these transactions at any given time that you want. There's also, if you take a look here, we also give you some metrics. So this was just a snapshot of that customer. Out of 735 fax job submissions, 95.58% of them were successful. A couple of them, a small percentage, had an invalid or a missing number, and then we had a couple of line busies. But you can drill down into the customer portal to the detail of these actual transactions and see exactly why these transactions are failing, and then you can engage Instant Info Systems, and they'll engage us, and you're working directly with the carrier at that point. You don't need to bring in the SBC team, the network team, the telecom team, the switch team, the fax team. You just, the right fax administrator or the fax server administrator can pick up the phone call and handle anything that's required. I'm going to hand it back over to Ken to our third case study.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so this case study, it's probably very common out there. We find this with a lot of our customers who have financial services applications where they're just sending purchase orders. In this example, they had a J.D. Edwards system, and they were sending purchase orders out of that for years. The subject matter expert that was at the organization who set up the integration 10, 15 years ago was no longer with the company. There was no cookbook as far as how to change or modify the integration, so they were kind of stuck with the integration, and the cost for development was just too great to shift over to the API method. And that primarily is why Etherfax has created this Etherfax integration module. And it acts very similar to the integration module for WriteFax. We can actually accept FCL commands coming directly from the same output. We can interpret those codes. It's a small piece of software that was loaded on one of their servers that was actually doing something else as well. It doesn't need a dedicated VM. And it's able to give you the same functionality, the same reliability, the high availability that Etherfax service provides. The benefit to this customer, as Paul's showing on the slide here, they had the opportunity to remove the fax server. Really, they got down to a point where they were no longer doing desktop faxings, but they still needed to address this very critical component of their business and send out their purchase orders through J.D. Edwards. So less complex, very simple. It was an application that was running on an existing Windows server, and they felt it was painless, and we really didn't need to have any extra development expertise from the customer side to make this work. The last case study, I think, is probably one of our most interesting, but it's a very common requirement that we're seeing within organizations, whether it's financial services, whether it's a banking institution, as this example is, or even one of our healthcare customers that have a central data center with information in it, with documents in it, and those documents need to be moved to clinics, or in this example, your bank has to send information to a branch. So they had an interesting requirement where they needed just to move documents. And they looked at some other technologies like Tumbleweed to move documents between a central place to a branch office. But the challenge is it was overcomplicated and very expensive to deploy. With the Etherfax service, they were able to leverage the API and securely, with end-to-end encryption, move documents from the corporate bank headquarters out to their branch locations. And this was something that was easy to set up from a development standpoint, and we had the opportunity not only to move it from one application at the corporate headquarters but to a branch application, but we had the ability to also enable devices, whether that's an MSP or a fax machine, sitting at each of these branches and provide that transmission of the document in an encrypted manner. And this was happening, the way they were doing it is these documents, 100+ pages, were moving in seconds. It didn't take hours to send a 100-page fax. It was moving in seconds to the branch location. Paul, I think you have some more details on this integration.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to back up a slide here, Ken, because I just want to emphasize here that one of the requirements here on the bottom was end-to-end encryption. Obviously, completely different than just sending it through a secure tunnel. They actually wanted the content or the payload fully encrypted as well, which is something that has been built into our patents, and no other service, telephony service or fax service out there could offer such. So what did we do? We introduced them to the Secure Exchange Network. And if you remember a couple of slides back of all the different fax server providers that we work with, those fax servers, MFPs, legacy fax devices are able to communicate directly with each other without hitting a telephone line. So if you take a look here, this was a fax that I had sent. It was 44 pages, and it took around 6 seconds to transmit from end to end. So that just goes to show you the power of the Etherfax technology as well as the Secure Exchange Network. These faxes were also transmitted at a much higher resolution. They were transmitted anywhere between 600 by 600 or in some cases 1200 by 1200 resolution. Regardless of the size, these things get transmitted, or these fax jobs get transmitted in seconds. We were able to enable all of their legacy fax machine equipment to take advantage of this technology. Fax transmissions were all transmitted through a secure tunnel. There's no special network access or firewall configuration needed, and large pages were transmitted instantaneously, as you see here, a 44-page going within 6 seconds. Taking a look here, you could actually see in the portal what we dub as a Secure Exchange Network transaction. So taking a look at this customer, they do about 33.2 million pages a month. They've had about 4,000 send transactions, and some of these are very, very large page transactions. So as I mentioned, these 40, 50, 60 plus pages go instantaneously. Imagine how that increases your workflow, your efficiency. It's guaranteed delivery. There's never a busy signal. And the best part is the end users and the organization did not have to change a single process. Whether the person walked up there and put in a 10-digit number and hit the pretty, the pretty green little button, or they faxed it directly out of their CRM or EHR, everything remained the same. And they had disparate systems. So we didn't change, the behavior or what people were accustomed to. So this is just a snapshot of an inbound send transaction. These are outbound send transaction histories. Again, all designated within the portal. But another requirement that they had was they said, listen, if we're sending out a fax, we want to make sure that we're only sending to a device that could accept end-to-end encryption. And if that fax machine or application or fax server cannot receive an end-to-end encryption, we're not going to send it. So how do we do that? So the fax application servers and what have you are programmed today to do a DIP or a DID lookup. So what will happen is they'll do a lookup, and you'll see here in the code example on the left, the 8442 number, you'll notice the accepted formats that this destination could receive. It says, look, I could receive a 600 by 600 page resolution or 20498 or what have you. And if they negotiate at a higher resolution, they're going to keep that document intact. And if you're sending out of an application, a PDF, and you're sending it to another recipient that could receive a PDF, we're going to keep it that way. There's no need to convert it, put it into TIFF, downgrade it in its resolution. The network and the devices are intelligent enough to go ahead and make that decision. And if you look on the bottom here, you'll see a public key, which is null, and that basically means, hey, I can't accept a fully encrypted document, so don't encrypt it. On the other side here, we have a call that's going to 5300. Here's the accepted image formats. Here's the accepted page widths. Oh, and by the way, they have a public key. that means that this device can receive an end-to-end encrypted document. So send it through the secure tunnel, but let's also do message level encryption, and let's encrypt that payload. And these two devices, this all happens in real time. And this is really where the future of fax and secure document delivery is going. You know, fax is inherent within the EtherFax technology, but we're going to send it out over phone line as a last resort. And the good thing on your end is there's nothing any different that you have to worry about, configure, change your processes. This is all inherent to the EtherFax patented technology. So I'm going to turn it back over to myself here and talk about the future and where it's going. Ironically enough, that's the EtherFax corporate headquarters, which is in Holmdel, New Jersey, which is in Bell Works, where the first fax machine was ever invented. So we're going to go back here to the EtherFax ecosystem. Since we are the transport for the majority of the major fax servers that are out there today, you can imagine the amount of send transactions, or what we call the SendX transactions, the end-to-end encrypted transactions that are going through these devices. Regardless of the technology, you have the ability to put EtherFax in a hybrid, maybe just assign 1 or 2 channels to it, create custom routes that you know that are going to other EtherFax endpoints, if you will. A lot of the people are using the network to transmit just standard native documents. If you want to submit a native Word document, a native PDF document, and the other end could accept it, and you'll know that through a DIP or a query, we'll go ahead and securely send it that way for you. There's a lot of options, there's a lot of capability, and there's a lot of intelligence within the ecosystem here and the technology. So when you're investing in EtherFax, which really there's not a lot of investment in terms of capital expenditure, but when you are making the decision to move to EtherFax, you are inherently getting much more than just dial tone. Let's talk about our encryption and security, and we're almost done here. People ask all the time, well, you know, your encryption, you say your encryption and all of this, and what type of encryption do you use? We use what's called ECI-ES. EtherFax is involved in other companies. We do a lot of work for what we like to call the alphabet agencies. So our developers, you know, who program these technologies for these agencies, EtherFax gets to inherit all of that. So what is elliptical curve integrated encryption scheme? It's a standard defined by the NIST. You know, it's a very, very strong encryption, you know, quantum encryption. Feel free to Google this, but this is the technology that is utilized within the EtherFax transport. And when we say we're serious about security and we know security, these are just a couple of our security patents within the industry. More than welcome to look them up. You'll see that these are all developed by the EtherFax engineers and scientists, but we really do know this like the back of our hand. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this back over to Julie. Julie, you there? I think she's on mute and not knowing it.
Thanks, Paul. I am clearly having some audio challenges on my end today. I apologize for that. Thank you both for all of this great information. This was a information-packed session, and I hope everybody was able to gather the information they were looking for. I know we received a lot of questions from the surveys that we took while we were during the registration process, and we've received quite a bit of questions here over the course of the webinar. So we've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to go through as many questions as we have time for, but just to reiterate, if we don't have time to get to your specific question, we will have somebody reach out to you directly. One question that came in while we were going through the presentation was, for reporting, how many days is information available on the EtherFax customer portal?
7 years.
What's that?
7 years.
7 years. Okay, is that our final answer, 7 years?
It's 7 years. We have not deleted to date since its inception. There's hundreds of millions of transactions in there, but for compliance, because we do service some very large entities, we are required, at the very minimum, 7 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. How does EtherFax integrate into the Ricoh MFPs? And how does a user send a fax from an MFP? How does EtherFax send an incoming fax right to an MFP and have it print out waiting for the customer? That's the question verbatim. Do you want to take that, Paul?
Sure. So currently right now we do not have a direct integration with a Ricoh MFP, so we're still relying on the fax server. However, we do have a product which is called our remote printing service, which is a little Windows service that's installed on your side of the firewall. And you could take any incoming jobs that come into the EtherFax network and point them to any printer that you want on your network. And the really nice thing about that is that's all managed, from our EtherFax portal. So the RPS will come in, it'll register, and then you can come into the portal and say, I want DID 5551212 to print to the HR, and DID 5551213 to print to sales. And that's all managed within our remote printing service product.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Here's one regarding support. If I use EtherFax from Instant Info Systems, who does the technical support? IIS or EtherFax? Ken, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're the one throat to choke. We staff our support desk live during business hours, and we would be the first contact. And most of the time, we're able to resolve the issues associated with EtherFax, but on the occasion, we need to escalate. We can escalate through the back channels to EtherFax 24/7, and make sure your issue gets resolved quickly.
Perfect. Thank you. Another technical question. How does EtherFax work with T.38 SIP trunk? I'll lob this to the EtherFax team.
We do not use any SIP within our network for a number of reasons. We are replacing SIP or T.38, if you will. T.38 is kind of taking us back in time. There's no error correction. You've been downgraded to 14.4 versus 33.6. When you utilize EtherFax, you are utilizing Brook Trout TR1034 industry standard proven technology going out over ISDN PRI lines.
And from the customer perspective, Paul, I think if they're also asking, if I have a SIP connection, are you leveraging that to communicate with EtherFax? And the answer is no, you cancel that SIP connection, and we're just using your standard data connection, which is what you're using for internet browsing, to connect to EtherFax. Is that right?
Correct.
Perfect. Thanks to you both. Next one, is EtherFax compatible with Microsoft Exchange? We
do not. That is more of an SMTP to mail. We leave that up to the fax server. So we do not accept inbound or we do not accept messages delivered via, to us, via SMTP. So there's no number at etherfax.net, and we're going to go ahead and transmit that. We leave that to the fax server.
And so what we do with our customers who have a need for SMTP faxing is we can couple not only the EtherFax Direct API solution to handle the application direct integrations, but we have a number of cloud service products that we can offer that will give you that SMTP and Office 365 integration to handle those desktop faxing needs as well. So they may be two separate products, but Instant Info Systems would support both of those with our help desk.
Perfect. Thanks. Here's a related one. Can I submit fax jobs directly from my cloud-based application, even though it's coming from a remote data center? For example, an Amazon data center.
You can indeed. We have a number of customers that do that. We actually are in a lot of the data centers that Amazon is in, so we could offer direct cross connects if your security team, deems so. But absolutely, I mean, that's the beauty, the beautiful part of Etherfax is it's a web services model, it's a web services architecture. So as long as you have internet connection, you can make a connection to us from literally anywhere.
Perfect. Here's a question. We use WriteFax and Etherfax already and are thinking of switching to a different fax server. If we get a new solution, can we still retain Etherfax and our existing fax numbers?
100%. As a matter of fact, yes, we have a lot of customers that do that as well. We can schedule a cutover. You can take your fax server out of commission. We will queue up the inbound numbers, and then we'll assign them to the new fax server. And that's something that can be done during the day and is done more often than not.
Great, thanks. Here's one I think is really relevant in light of the recent natural disasters and hurricanes that we've seen. Will Etherfax queue my inbound faxes should I lose connection to the service? So Paul, maybe you can speak to the Etherfax uptime
Sure.
during some of these natural disasters.
So by default, we will automatically queue your inbound faxes if we do lose connectivity. That's out of the box by default. You have to go into the portal and uncheck the the offline option to busy out your numbers. During as far back as Sandy, recent hurricanes, Etherfax has maintained 100% uptime. And in the event that we do need to switch over to data centers, that's all done automatically via DNS. We've gone as far as extending after-hours support free of charge to customers that are affected. We do put everything on our status page. Our team has to update the status page every 30 minutes regardless of a solution if we are having some type of an outage, but we're very transparent. And that's just all part of the service.
Great, thank you. Next is, what is the minimum contract commitment? Ken, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very flexible with our contracts. We have very low commitment levels, and we can provide a solution that is just maybe a monthly commitment. We can even go quarterly or annual. Some of the challenges with some of the other solutions out there that require you to have a multi-year commitment is you really don't know how your business is going to be sending faxes, in years to come. So we really want to provide you with a flexible option so that you're not committed to have a minimum monthly contract, let's say 100,000 pages a month, when you may have a business where you've got peaks in one quarter and valleys in another quarter. We can actually bundle your pages in an annual basis or even a quarterly basis. So we do have some very low minimum commitments, but we can be flexible with the terms of those commitments.
Great, thanks, Ken. So here's a more technical question regarding CommDLL. It says, are we going to stop CommDLL implementation? We are still using CommDLL to consume WriteFax services. Paul, you want to take that, or Ryan?
I could take that. If you are talking directly to the Etherfax API, you would switch to either a .NET, PHP, the language of your choice, and you would not be using CommDLL anymore.
Okay, thank you. We get this question quite a bit. Can Etherfax be used in countries outside of the US and Canada?
Absolutely. We have data centers in Europe. We have data centers in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Czech Republic. So we have 6 data centers globally. We have LMP or DDI or DID capability in 51 countries. So absolutely. Wherever you have a web connection, you have the ability to utilize Etherfax.
Perfect.
Hey, Paul, can you address on this question the ability for Etherfax to limit the data within the U.S. for those customers that just want to stay U.S.-based?
We do, yes, absolutely. We do offer or we do honor data sovereignty. So for customers who require data sovereignty, we do have the ability to flag that account, and we will only keep the transactions unless they're destined for outside of the sovereignty. We'll only keep it within that part of the country.
Great, thank you. All right, we are at the 55 past the hour mark. We'll do, I've got 2 more questions here that I think would be interesting for our audience. We touched on both of these issues a little bit in the presentation, but I think they're both really good to review. One viewer is asking, if we use different fax servers in different parts of our company, can we connect EtherFax to all of them? I think, Ken, you actually mentioned that in a case study earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. We can actually leverage multiple EtherFax accounts, connect to each of those fax servers, and they will experience the benefit. So they don't need to necessarily rip out the fax server. We could be that transport and provide them the highly available fax service connecting to their existing fax server. Perfect.
And I'm going to squeeze in one more question before we sign off, because I think this was a big part of our the integration piece of our discussion today. It says, I'm using FCL today with WriteFax to talk to my ERP. Are you saying I can bypass WriteFax and just use EtherFax to talk to my ERP? Does it replace the integration module?
The answer to that is yes. Without any code development or any changes, we could replace the WriteFax integration module with the EtherFax integration module and satisfy that request. Absolutely.
Perfect. Oh, we got one more. I'm going to sneak this in. Is it possible that instead of sending TIFF file or image files, that we can send a PDF file from WriteFax, from the WriteFax server for inbound faxes?
For inbound faxes, that would be an
option. That's a WriteFax configuration, absolutely. So although the fax comes in from EtherFax as I think it's a compressed TIFF file, it's actually a setting within WriteFax that allows you to receive it as a PDF into your user's email or network directory drop. So that's a WriteFax configuration, not necessarily an EtherFax question, I think. But you can do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Ken. Okay, that is going to wrap it up for us today, and we'll let everybody get on with their day on time here. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. We really appreciate your time and attention, and a huge thanks to our panelists today, Paul Banco, Ryan Collins, and Ken Anaya. Just a chock-full informative presentation, and really appreciate your time with us today as well. So again, I will reiterate, if you have additional questions, please reach out to us at any time, or we will definitely reach out to you if we didn't have time to get to your question. And you can learn much more about Instant Infosystems and EtherFax at the Instant Infosystems website at instantinfosystems.com. And with that, I will wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.